Good morning. Thank you for joining us. We did want to give you an update on the efforts on homelessness. As you are aware, we really are in this phase of executing. The leadership team has kind of formed a pathway forward, and it's really about us being able to execute the activities that we believe that we need to be successful and move forward. So I just wanted Scott to start this morning's news conference by talking and giving you a little bit of an update on the situation in Kaka.
Thank you, Governor. So, following the city's enforcement efforts in Kaka'ako, Makai, the state and the service providers that we contract have really been closely monitoring the situation. According to service providers who are continuing to outreach in the area, we understand that an estimated 130 homeless individuals have since relocated to the surrounding parks maintained by HCDA. That's primarily Kaka'ako Waterfront Park as well as Kewalo Basin Park. There are an estimated 40 individuals residing in Kewalo Basin Park. That's about 1/3 of the population, and another estimated 90 in Kaka'ako Waterfront Park. These homeless campers residing in the park are currently camping overnight in the park, violating the park rules regarding park closure hours. We've continued to assertively outreach the area, offer shelter and other resources to the individuals in this area since the beginning of August. Our continued outreach efforts have resulted in additional people moving into shelter or housing. Since October 16th, 11 new individuals, including one family from Kaka'ako from those areas, have been placed into shelter or permanent housing. However, despite these efforts, many individuals continue to decline help. So we have been working very closely with HCDA as well as the Department of Public Safety and the outreach providers to develop a plan to really continue to outreach in the area, but also begin to enforce the park closure rules. So beginning as early as November 12th, we will be enforcing the park closure hours, which are from 10 p.m. at night to 5:30 a.m. in Kewalo Basin Park and 6 a.m. in the Kaka'ako Waterfront Park. Over the next 2 weeks, we will be working with the outreach providers, deputy sheriffs, HCDA staff, and others to continue to do assertive outreach in the area. We will be posting, or actually have begun posting additional signage starting from last week Friday in both parks, detailing park closure hours. In addition, we are canvassing the area and providing notices of park closure. This is the notice that we will be providing to the families and individuals residing in those two parks. It notifies them of the park closure hours, which again are from 10 p.m. to either 5:30 a.m. or 6 a.m. and also provides information regarding different shelter resources in the area. It gives contact information for the Institute for Human Services, Next Step Shelter, and the Lighthouse Outreach Center. So that's an update of what we've been working on. And to support this effort, we are looking to do a supplemental proclamation to the emergency proclamation that was announced last week that will allow us to really approach the situation in Kaka'ako in a coordinated manner. I think coordinated outreach is a real key component of our strategy to addressing this issue. And it's important to make sure that outreach efforts are aligned with efforts of law enforcement and the efforts of other groups who are also working to provide services to these individuals and families in Kaka'ako. I'm going to turn it back to the governor to provide a little bit more information regarding the supplemental proclamation.
Sure. Yes, thank you. So we do, as we have been working to execute this effort, we have recognized that we need additional authority. So we will be issuing a supplemental proclamation. The supplemental proclamation supports a coordinated response which includes building relationships with the homeless. As you know, we have been working with the City and County of Honolulu's community policing team. And so we do recognize that we need to look at similar kinds of program for state parcels like HCDA as well as Department of Transportation. That's a big part of the supplemental proclamation. It really is about educating the homeless population and providers regarding the availability of services for the homeless, and then the compassionate relocation efforts. So we do believe that this additional supplemental proclamation is required to allow us to be successful in executing the plan. So that's really what how we'll be proceeding forward.
Any funding with that, Governor?
Well, as you know, the leadership team had identified potential funding sources. So again, this is one of those that we appreciate the support from the chairs in the legislature. We are working with them as we identify the funds that are required. You know, we have been providing additional sheriff's duties to provide security in the Kaka'ako area, especially surrounding the medical school. And so part of that is really looking at creating the ability for us to enforce park closures and other rules to ensure that we can move forward in the homelessness situation.
So are you planning on a sweep on November 12th? And is it the whole park area, or is there a certain?
You know, again, the ideal situation is to coordinate the enforcement and displacement activities with availability of service providers. So again, we are coordinating that with service providers, looking at the availability of space, and then we would we would, just like in the broader Kaka'ako area, we would be going as quickly as it makes sense. You know, we want to make sure that we have space in the shelters. We want to give and offer the homeless the opportunity to move into shelters as we proceed through the parks in HCDA's jurisdiction.
So November 12th is not a hard date, it's just no sooner than November 12th.
Well, we'll be working really hard to look at that, you know, again, going through the same process that we've done through the rest of Kaka'ako, providing them notice, giving them access and letting them know that security service providers are available. We'll be coordinating efforts with the service providers so that they can be conducting outreach in the park. I was personally in the park last Friday to walk through and look at the situation in Kaka'ako. We do know that we want to be able to respond quickly so that we don't allow the encampment to again build. So that's one of the reasons why we are proceeding in this manner.
Would it be a DOT crew that actually do the cleanup like they do?
Well, we're coordinating with all the agencies. You know, as we have gotten into the Kaka'ako situation and we've learned a lot of what was happening, we do know that we have to look at all the agencies in state government and begin to make efforts similar to what we did in Kaka'ako. So definitely Fort Fujigami and the Department of Transportation has been very proactive. You know, we've identified a number of parcels and we do recognize the compassionate disruption is one of the areas that, you know, they kind of got into a routine of doing it twice a year and they thought that that was sufficient. We do know that the homeless really do migrate to areas where there is no enforcement. So we know that on a going forward basis, we will have to have some program of compassionate disruption, just as the city does. And so that's what this supplemental proclamation is targeted to, ensuring that we can get the programs and the people in place to be able to sustain this. You know, Ford at the Department of Transportation has recognized that, again, he needs to have the capability to look at all of the Department of Transportation properties and be able to um, be responsive to the homeless situation.
Governor, sorry, I have a question from John Burnett from the Hawaii Island.
Sure.
And he asked, are any coordinated efforts being considered, including enforcement of park hours on neighbor islands, such as Wailoa and Mo'oheo parks in Hilo?
You know, we are working with the mayors in each county, trying to understand what their situation is. You know, one of the reasons for the emergency proclamation initially was to expand service providers to ensure that we have service providers in statewide. So we definitely are working with the counties and in order for us to be able to implement the lessons learned in Kaka'ako across the state.
We had done stories with the gentleman who does the big New Year's Eve kaka'ako celebration, and he had a lot of concerns this week that it's getting to the point where he can't even put together a show to get the permit. Is that being taken into consideration on what part to clear, or?
So the enforcement efforts will start with the Kewalo Basin Park first. We plan to do our initial phase in Kewalo Basin, and then following that, do an evaluation and then prepare to move into the larger Kaka'ako Waterfront Park area. We also are starting from today having sheriff's deputies, HCDA staff, and homeless outreach providers go into both parks to provide notices of the park closure, provide access to shelter and other resources to individuals in the areas, and really give them advance notice about the enforcement efforts that are planned. We really are trying to follow national best practice, which includes, giving advance notice before any type of enforcement effort, making sure that you have procedures in place to inform people about the resources available, and continuing to really closely monitor the shelter vacancy to make sure that we have sufficient space.
What can be done about the chronic homeless, the ones that refuse services, and typically they will not go to a shelter, and all they do is move from place to place? Is there a plan in place, for that?
In the emergency proclamation, we did increase the level of funding for the Housing First program, not only on Oahu, but also on the neighbor islands. That was intentionally done to target the chronically homeless individuals that we know have higher levels of need and really need access to permanent housing quickly. So as outreach workers are going into both parks, they're not only offering access to shelter, they're offering access to Housing First and other permanent housing programs as well. In addition, the outreach workers really are building a relationship with the individuals residing in the parks. So even if they are to relocate into another area, at least now there's a connection made with the outreach workers so that they can continue to provide services. They know where the individual has relocated to, and there's steps being made to guide that person to eventually to permanent housing. I think in the past and previous disruption and enforcement efforts, when following the enforcement, individuals did not know where the people had relocated to. I think in this case, we really worked very hard to make sure that as the outreach providers are going into the area, that they know these individuals and families in the community by name. I think that's a national best practice, is to create finding lists of each community as you go into these areas, so that even if the individuals then relocate someplace else, the outreach workers know who they are and they're able to, as I mentioned earlier, to maintain that contact.
We're doing a lot of focus on Kaka'ako, but there's a lot of concern in the Wahiawa area with a growing encampment there.
So in Wahiawa, the state, as I mentioned earlier, continues to contract homeless outreach providers across the island of Oahu, who service not just Kaka'ako, but also these other areas of the island as well. Waikiki Health and Kalihi Palama and a number of other outreach providers are working to do a coordinated outreach event the first week of November in the Wahiawa area to really specifically target the population that they're seeing there. As we've mentioned in previous press conferences, we have started to collect additional data about the populations in Waianae, Wahiawa, and in Windward, Oahu, the Waimanalo area. What we're seeing in the Wahiawa area is that there's a higher percentage of both individuals and families that are chronically homeless and need a higher level of support, such as Housing First. So again, even as we're concentrating on Kaka'ako, at the same time, we're working with outreach workers to make sure these other areas of the island are covered as well.
Explain, sorry, I was just still confused about what's happening on November 12th. I didn't understand what that means.
So our goal is to start the enforcement as early as November 12th. But we understand that, depending on what the feedback that we get as we're doing the outreach to the individuals and families in the area, we may need to make adjustments to that date. November 12th is our target date, but I think we do understand that we need to be flexible depending on what the outreach providers and others encounter as they're doing the initial notices.
How much money, additional money does the Housing First have now with the proclamation, and how many people more could be helped by that?
It's an additional 500,000, a little over 500,000, about a little over 300,000 for Oahu and 250,000 for the neighbor islands. Altogether, between the appropriation for Housing First, the appropriations for the other programs, such as Housing Placement Emergency Grant Program, we're estimating that an additional 1,000 individuals statewide will be served. I think on the neighbor islands, what we're looking to do is implement Housing First in a model that really focuses on case management and tries to better leverage housing vouchers that are available for federal funding sources, such as shelter plus care or permanent supportive housing funding available from HUD.
What, Housing First specifically, how many asking for that?
Right now on Oahu, we anticipate probably an additional 20 to 25 individuals to be served. And on the neighbor islands, we were working with the providers to get an accurate assessment of how, the number that they feel they would be able to assist with the amount of funding that we're providing.
So again, and just to be clear, so what we intend to do is provide notice of what the park rules are in the facilities, to distribute information that informs them what the park closure hours are. And then we would also be providing information about who the service providers are and where they might be able to seek services so that they can not be out on the streets. And then the targeted date is for enforcement of the park closures beginning November 12th, so that we would have some time to work with the homeless to encourage them to take advantage of the service providers and find spaces in existing emergency shelters so that they can be out of the parks and then begin enforcement.
Can you characterize what you saw Friday?
Well, definitely, it wasn't the same situation on Ohi Street or anything in Kaka'ako, but you could begin to see the homeless starting to settle in. The tents were back up. It seemed to be a mix of individuals and families, although a lot of the families were moved out into shelters already. So, I think it's just that notion that we want to make sure that that they understand that we will be enforcing the rules in Kaka'ako, and which means that at 10 p.m. we will clear the park, and that they cannot be in the park until the next morning.
Does Greg have census status for it, the survey that's conducted? Is that why Greg's here?
Well, he's one of the service providers.
Yeah, I think the census that we did really showed that there's primarily individuals at primarily mainly single adults and couples residing in Kewalo Basin Park and in the Point Panic area of Kaka'ako Waterfront Park. As I mentioned, about 1/3 of the 130 individuals are estimated to be at Kewalo Basin Park, and the other 2/3 in Kaka'ako Waterfront Park, but mainly single adults and couples in the Point Panic area of the Waterfront Park, and families in the area closest to the amphitheater and the large parking lot.
Can I ask Greg a question? Greg, in terms of people refusing help, we have a big community in Kapahulu that they sleep in Kapahulu and move down to Waikiki, Makiki Community Park, they move down to Ala Moana Park. obviously are not looking for services. What's your assessment of all these people?
First, my name is Greg Payton. I'm here today in my role as chair of Partners in Care. Partners in Care is a coalition of 30 nonprofit homeless providers on Oahu whose mission is to end homelessness in Hawaii. To answer Wayne's question, if there's a single simple answer, it's trust. Understand that all the services that we provide are voluntary. So to get people engaged, to be able to take advantage of the services, usually requires building a level of trust with people. If the person is a single adult who's homeless and mentally ill, that requires sometimes weeks, sometimes months to be able to engage somebody who might be paranoid. Remember, by some estimates, the average length of time for somebody to be in the community is 6 years on the streets. So we're coming up to them saying, trust us, we have a place for you to go. That sometimes is very difficult for people to receive and understand. So the initial group that we worked with in the last sweep was very productive in being able to put people into appropriate levels of care. What we hope will come from that is that the other people that are homeless will see that, will trust us, and understand that we are not there to criminalize people, we're there to house people. And that's an important distinction. So for people to gain that trust with us is very important. As I just want to underscore what Scott and Morishige had said earlier, that the difference now than in past times when we work together like this is that we now have what's called a by name list of the people that are homeless in the community. That is so critical and so important, because what that means is that we will know who they are. So if they turn up in our database, for example, if my organization was not the primary person, we know who that person is. And we can maintain that trust and that relationship on a one-to-one basis between that homeless person and an outreach provider. So it may not happen as quickly as people would like it to, it may not happen overnight, but it will happen. It will happen in the next few months.
Anything else? All
Rob,
set?
Governor, the next Arahiko merger is moving along.
You know what? We're gonna have that question answered after this. This news
Okay.
conference is on the homelessness.
Sure.
Okay, all right. Thank
well,
you very
Governor,
much.
Governor, there could be viewers at home, maybe they're watching this, that might be cynical, roll their eyes, thinking, oh, here we go again, another thing. But why are you so confident this initiative will work, that this will be different?
Well, I do think that if you drove through Kaka'ako 2 months ago, and if you were to drive through Kaka'ako today, you would notice the difference specifically. I think if you talk to the service providers, they will tell you that there is a much larger degree of cooperation. You know, as Greg has said, we really are looking at the homeless, and we have acknowledged them by name now. And if it's really they have been receiving services from one provider and not the other, and they show up in some place that's great, trying to provide services, then we have the service providers really working with each other. They've been cooperating, trying to maximize the resources that we have. You know, they've been willing to work between themselves to move singles so that we can make spaces for families and a whole bunch of other things. So I do think that the system of dealing with homelessness is significantly improved in terms of coordination of services that we're providing. And we are seeing significant success in encouraging people to move into shelter. And that's really given us the opportunity to move them into a permanent situation. You know, one of the things that we are really high on is this summit for landlords, because one of the challenges is the lack of permanent housing situation. And we do have lots of federal funds available, Section 8 vouchers, those kinds of implements that can support someone being in a rental. But we don't have enough landlords that are willing. And so that's part of the cooperation with the Hawaii Realtors Association and the Landlord Summit that we're organizing.
If you were to start that sweep today, the 140 we have left in Kaka'ako and Kuala, do we have openings for that many people?
You know, as I mentioned earlier, we continue to monitor our shelter vacancies on a regular basis. We believe that we do have sufficient space in our shelter system at this time, but it's important that we monitor, regularly. So when I mentioned that, we're looking to start enforcement as early as November 12th. That's one of the factors that we would take into consideration as well, whether we continue to have sufficient shelter space at the time that we're targeting for enforcement of park closure to begin.
Okay, now then, all set? Thanks, everybody.
Great. Thank you, Governor. Thank you.